So, an experienced culture writer and editor who's been featured in a long list of publications, including Paste Magazine, The Village Voice, American Songwriter, Ultimate Classic Rock, and Rotten Tomatoes, Jeff Giles makes his debut as a novelist with Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. And we are very happy to have Jeff here with us today. Jeff, thank you for joining us at the Tiffin Writing Workshop podcast.
Thank you for making room for me. I'm happy to be here.
What we want to talk with you about is how'd you do it? How'd you do it, man?
No. Voice. Who do you know there?
At the time, I knew the editor, Maura Johnston, who was, prior to being the Village Voice, was with a site called Idolater that I think is still around. That was a back in the days of the MP3 blog. Idolater was a big deal, and I had a site. I still do. It's called Jefitoblog. And I did some things that Idolater was very nice about promoting, and Maura and I got to be friendly, and then she got to be editor of their culture desk, and I thought, aha, here's a connection that I can take advantage of for my own personal gain. And yeah, that's how it happened. The first spark was I really wanted to grow up to make a living making music, but I was a kid who didn't know how to play an instrument, and I was a kid. So, words came a lot easier to me, at least the written ones. We'll see how articulate I can be during this conversation. And there was a local zine that hired me to review music when I was about 13. So that's when it started. Way back in 1987, I was, in fact, prior to people being able to hear part of our conversation, we were talking about the New Monkeys. I'm positive I reviewed the New Monkeys album in 1987. That was the kind of thing I was writing about back then.
But weren't we all writing about the New Monkeys in 1987?
I don't know. It didn't feel like it at the time, but maybe.
Looking at your writing sample, you're able to send us an advanced reading copy of the book.
Yeah.
And I just want to commend your writing style is very clean and polished, like the
Thank you.
flow of the language, the quality of the vocabulary. Like it's obvious that you're very educated and really understand what you're writing about. So I wanted to commend you on that. It's really smooth and easy to read.
Thanks very much. That's what we strive for. I do love words. I am a passionate defender of the English language.
Well, where did the idea for the book come from?
The idea from the book came from the fact that I had a coworker who used to threaten me. Anytime I upset her, she would threaten me that after she died, she was going to haunt me from beyond the grave. And she's like half my age. And so one day I said, if anybody's going to haunt anybody here, it's going to be me haunting you. And she said, but you don't even believe in ghosts. And I thought, you're right. And that's kind of funny. And so from there, I spent some time thinking about what kind of person you would have to be to make, aggressively not believing in the afterlife kind of your whole deal. And I'm 50 years old. So I remember the kind of the end of the era when you would see debunkers on like the Tonight Show, people who could be famous for arguing over the paranormal. You'd see like, Uri Geller, the Amazing Randy, people like that talking about this stuff very much in the public eye. And so I just kind of invented this scenario in which this guy, Langley Powell, the title character, as a young boy, is very enamored with this famous magician and becomes very scarred by the fact that this magician is sort of revealed to be a fraud in public, and he goes through the rest of his life maintaining that anybody who claims to have paranormal abilities or knows anything about the afterlife is a fraud, and that people need to really be grateful for the stuff that they can see and hear and touch here on Earth. And then he dies and he finds out that he's a ghost, and he's very upset about that.
So can we talk about, once this idea, how did it germinate and what did it start to look like? When did it start to take shape? And what was that process like for you?
So this is my third book. and my first novel, and the process leading up to actually writing it was similar to the process leading up to my first book, which was me standing around with my hands in my pockets for a period of time saying, this should be a book and I would love to read it, but obviously I'm not going to be the one to write it. I don't know how common that is with other people. I have found that for me in my creative life, one of the best tests for a good idea is one that just won't leave me alone, even after I try to smother it. And that was the case with this one. It just kept nagging at me that I thought it had a lot of potential and it was a book that I wanted to read. And then COVID hit. And I had some time off booked from work. I had a week off and lockdown happened. And obviously I wasn't going to be able to make that trip. So instead I stayed home and I thought, well, I'm here. I might as well sit down and see if I can find something here.
Yeah.
And even then I was still too much of a coward to believe that I could really do it. So I reached out to a friend of mine that I had collaborated with in the past. And I said, how about if I write a chapter and then you write a chapter and we'll just go back and forth like that until the book is done. And he said, cool, let's try it. So I wrote the first chapter and then I sent it to him and he responded with a version of the second chapter that is not fundamentally different from the one that's in the book, but different. And then I responded with, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 chapters all at once. And I was like, I'm sorry. This just kind of came out. And he said, look, this is clearly not meant to be a collaboration. This is your story and you need to be the one to finish it. And that was very nice of him. And so from there, I for that week, I worked on it a lot. And then for much of the rest of 2020, I carved out as much time as I could on the weekends to sit and work on it. So it was from, I guess, about April to November of 2020 is the amount of time that it took to write that first draft.
When you talk about standing around and having your hands in your pockets, I talk a lot about imposter syndrome or a job being, something like a novel being a very big undertaking, one that I don't feel I'm up to. How do you get through that sort of self-doubt?
That's a great question. I don't know how equipped I am to answer it. I can tell you that during my days as a so-called recording artist, playing live was never something that I was particularly eager to do. It was never anything that I thought I was particularly good at, but it was something that I just kind of felt compelled to do as part of the process. So we would book a show and I would go to the venue and I would feel, a nominal amount of butterflies and I would just kind of get out there and do it and then it would be over. And I think writing a novel is somewhat similar to that in that, I absolutely did not believe that I had one in me, even though I had written a couple of nonfiction books. It just seems like it feels impossible to do until you've done it. And so I think the way to get through that is just to sit down and do it. Yeah. I don't know if there's any other way. Like you just go page by page. And if the story continues to manifest itself to you as you go, then I think you're on the right trail. If you know your characters well enough and they do a good job of kind of telling you what they should be doing, then
How much outside work during the composition of the first draft? How much outside work were you doing? Like notes over here, sort of, maybe throwing things onto your phone with ideas. How organized were you in keeping ideas?
Another wonderful question. I use a software called Scrivener that, from what I understand, is very popular with a lot of writers because it allows you to use sort of virtual note cards. And I know a lot of writers do that. They'll make even like a bulletin board and they'll map out the story. I didn't do that. I kind of just let the story tell me where. This sounds so pompous. I can't believe I'm saying it, but
No. You're good. You're good. Nope.
I didn't know where it was going to go, really. I had kind of a vague idea and I knew who the bad guy was going to be. I knew sort of how it was going to end. I didn't know exactly how I was going to get there, but I knew who Langley was and I knew who Frank was. I didn't map it out really beyond knowing what the basic arc would be. I didn't make any note cards. I didn't use that part of Scrivener to break it down. It was much more of a seat of the pants expedition.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about that, the kind of spectrum between plotter and pantser and how it really is sort of a false positive to say that you're one or the other. Like I think you're constantly sliding in that spectrum and that you need a little of both at any time, but like, which one is more important? It sounds to me like the way you approached it was you had a really solid understanding of the characters and that you were just consciously putting obstacles in front of them and then asking yourself, how would this person respond to this situation? And then you write it down. And then you put another obstacle in front and go, okay, well, now what are they going to do? And then you write it down. Is that kind of how you approached it?
Pretty much, yeah. I think if you're a plotter, I could be wrong about this, but I think if you're mostly a plotter, then I think you put yourself in situations where you end up having to kill darlings. And I didn't really have to do that with this. I think that's partly because it's a supernatural fantasy. And so, you can make up whatever rules you need to in order to fit whatever narrative you feel like you want to write. Yeah.
Now that makes sense, because if you have I know I am not really interested in developing a full-blown plot that kind of says, okay, this is going to be a 250-page book, and here are all the beats. Like, I can't envision, the same way that I can't create a fully human, real person from scratch. What I'm doing when I'm writing is taking aspects of people I know, kind of crashing them together, and now have a new interesting person, but I don't know what they're going to do until they have something to respond to. So it sounds really, that's encouraging. And I think for our listeners, if you're the kind of person who finds plotting very daunting, like I did, then you can follow the Jeff Giles method and sit your butt down and just start putting stuff in front of your characters. And the other thing that may be true, and Jeff, tell me if this matches your experience, if you don't know your characters very well and you put an obstacle in front of them and have this sort of, gosh, I really don't know, they could do like one of 9 different things. Did you experience any of that in your writing?
No, I didn't. Maybe because there's not an overabundance of characters in the story, and some of them are actual real people who are making, cameos from the afterlife. So J. Edgar Hoover makes an appearance in the book. There's only so much I can have him do.
My favorite of the Hoovers.
Is that so?
But that's a whole other podcast for your president.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Petty makes an appearance. A social activist named Edna Griffith, who was sort of Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks. She's in the book. The first female librarian in Los Angeles is there from the afterlife, and these are all people who you kind of know who they are and what they did and what they stood for, and so you put them in the story to do that.
No, that's great, because that means that you've got a really fully formed understanding of who they are. And that probably is a great place to start, especially if you don't have like a detailed plot. So I think that's great.
Yeah. I just absolutely love first draft writing, with the things that I've written. It feels like it's such a freeing thing. Like I'm not bound by, the idea that someone's going to have to read it, that person being art and telling me this doesn't make sense. And so there's such a freedom with that. How many legit drafts did you end up doing? I don't know why I worded it as legit drafts, as if one wasn't for some reason.
Well, they might not be. I mean, I see social media posts from enough writers to know that there are authors who will just completely obliterate the first draft and kind of rip it down to the studs. If I had gotten to the end of this and I felt like I needed to do that, I don't know what I would have done. I'm not sure I would have had the energy to start over again. I finished that first draft around November of 2020, right around Thanksgiving. And then in January of 2021, I went back and read it again with an eye toward fixing anything or altering anything that I felt like needed to change. Fundamentally, it all stayed pretty much the same. And then after I signed the contract with the publisher, they said, speak now or forever hold your peace. Take a look at this. If there's anything that you want to change it now. And so at that point, and this is probably a stereotypical answer, I did the most work at the end. I think endings, it's very hard to stick the landing. And with the ending of this book being that it's a supernatural comedy, there are fantasy elements. I think stories like this, where there's a good guy and a bad guy, they usually end with some kind of big battle that if it's adapted into a TV show or a film, there's all kinds of CGI and it's very loud. And I knew that I didn't want that. I wanted it to be a lot more internal and quieter, but I think that the original version of this was too abrupt, and I needed to go back and flesh it out. So that's basically it. I didn't rip out any chunks. I didn't have to turn anything upside down and look at it from a different angle. The story, when I was done with it, I was pretty happy with the way it turned out.
Well, that gives us an opportunity to pivot to something I'm really interested in talking to you about, which is the actual publishing of your book. So I've been doing research, and we get this question a lot from people about whether they should go the traditional publishing route or a hybrid, or what some people call a vanity press, or just a true self-publishing route. And I saw that you published through Humorist Books, which is, I think, an imprint of something else, and I wasn't familiar with them. So it might be a great way to kind of kick off that discussion, to just kind of pick at what your experience was with them. And look, this isn't a critique or an endorsement of them at all. We're really just looking at how you decided to go this route and what you thought of it, having come through the other end. So how did you, what influenced you to choose Humorous Books?
I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think whether it's purposely or not, I think a lot of this stuff is presented as kind of a mystery, to anybody who hasn't done it. When I published my first book came out in 2013. It's an oral history of the long-running ABC daytime drama One Life to Live, and I self-published that. It was very easy. In fact, when it came out, it was accidental. I didn't realize that I was hitting publish when I did, and it was a positive experience. I think partly because that book was so hyper-focused on such a niche audience that they were very easy to reach. The second thing I did was a book about beer for the guys that used to do the Uncle John's Bathroom Reader series. And that was just an assignment. It was supposed to be the first book in a trilogy of trivia books for like dads. This one was about beer, and then there was supposed to be one about, I think, bourbon, and then I think another one about barbecue. And it all sounded like a lot of fun to me, but as these things tend to happen, there were business deals, and the publisher sort of went away, and so those other two never happened. And then with this, I think the elevator pitch for this book is a good one. I think I felt like it was sellable. I felt like I wanted to at least try to find an agent and a publisher to get this out in the world in the quote unquote traditional way. Like I said, I had a very positive experience self-publishing. I mean, I think if you self-publish a novel, then it's very different. It's a lot more difficult to promote a novel. But really, I just wanted to give it a try. I just wanted to see if I could, because I felt like it was kind of it was a commercially friendly endeavor, and I wanted to say that I had given it my best shot. So between 2021 and 2023, anytime I felt like I had thick enough elephant skin to query an agent and either not hear back or hear no, I would send out my pitch. I was not very structured about it. I was not very disciplined about it. I think a lot of creative people are like this. The making of the thing is the fun part. Everything else is kind of a drag. And if anybody has printed out a map to get you to the place where you have a literary agent, I haven't seen it. I don't think it exists. I think a lot of it comes down to luck. And for me, it came back to the guy that I invited to collaborate on this with. Every, 3 or 4 months, he would email me and say, "Hey, how's it coming? What's the status on the book?" And then ultimately he ended up becoming an editor at Humorist Books, and they had an open submission period, and he emailed me and he said, "I want you to send in the manuscript." So I did, and they liked it enough to put it out. And that is how it happened. I mean, like I said, I think if there is a map to do this, I haven't seen it. I think often it comes down to who you know and timing and luck. And that was definitely the case for me.
we've heard that a lot, and we've for real. And it's not in a way that is sort of shoulder shrugged, amplify the despair and go get your bottle of scotch. Like that's not it. It's just about how much effort you're putting into networking and meeting people. And you never know who the quote unquote right people are. So you meet everybody, right? Like go meet everybody. And eventually those connections will offer opportunities that if you hadn't done that legwork, you wouldn't have even known about them in the first place. So I think, for folks at home who are laboring over their magnum opus and they are tinkering with the language to get it just right and then expecting to throw that thing out into the world and have a bidding war. That's usually unrealistic, right? Like even though we know it's great, right? We know it's awesome, but everybody else doesn't. And the bar, to kind of educate everybody about the quality of the work, they have to trust you first. So I'm really thankful that you shared that with us because it does match a lot of what we've heard before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on the show, on my podcast, The Record Player, we talked to a lot of authors. And while I was in the throes of, flailing about trying to find an agent, anytime we had an author on the show, I would mention that I was looking for an agent. And I never really came out and said, how did you do it? Tell me how to do it. But they never were, at no point did any author ever say, well, here's how I did it. This is the story of how I found my agent. Because I really think that there kind of isn't an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes it feels like it's also just, well, you just have to put in the work or something because there's, as an actor in New York City, there's always this idea of hustling, I'd been an actor since 2002. And so it just sort of feels like you have to take advantage of every single opportunity that comes your way. And when you're younger, I think it's the idea that you have to, like, if you see Steven Spielberg on the street, you grab him and give him your 30-second pitch.
Right.
But then you get older, as I was last New Year's Eve catering at Steve Martin's house. When you see him, he's not going to make eye contact with you. Steven Spielberg will not. Kate Capshaw will ask you to get another drink. He won't.
Right.
But I think in a different sense, you do learn that means the hustle just means to build the community and to have people that are reading. And it worked out for you because you already had a community there. And it just seemed to kind of to help. The more folks you get involved, like I can't even get in my friends to have a bidding war as to who wants to read my novels, much less having agents go over it. So I think it's really wonderful. And I think that's the thing. It's a mixture of all of it. Hard work, luck, being in the right place at the right moment, and having enough faith in what you're doing to present it instead of saying, they're not going to want to hear that.
And the longer you query, the longer you pitch, the harder that becomes, right? And I'm glad we're talking about this because and even if you do put in the work, that's not a guarantee that you're going to achieve the goal in the way that you wanted to achieve it.
Yeah. Whenever I see TikTok videos of carpenters building walls in their homes or doing some sort of home repair, and they do it on that sort of like time-lapse video, and it looks like it took them 30 seconds, and they have this beautiful seamless wall, and then I go to build a wall or try to do some kind of renovation of my home, and it just looks like I let a third grader loose, high on cocaine with a box of crayons. It's just, it's like there's this ideal that we all shoot for, but it's really a lot of work. And it's just everybody's story just becomes different with it.
100%.
Well, this is a really interesting jumping off point to kind of remind folks what the traditional model is versus kind of a hybrid or true self-publishing. And I would like to say that and then ask you kind of where this experience falls for you. So the real traditional, Simon & Schuster, whatever, is that sort of querying and also having a submission process, which it appears that humorous books has. Like they have an open period where they're actually taking new submissions. There is a vetting process. There are rejections and acceptance, which is very different from sort of the other end of the spectrum, that true self-publishing where everybody can publish whatever they want without any real editorial rigor. So within that spectrum, where did your experience fall? What did that look like as far as, you're being accepted into this rank and sort of your struggle?
I got the impression that they were prepared to do as much editorial heavy lifting as the manuscript required. I don't know if they were just flattering me or not, but they felt like the manuscript was sound and that they didn't really need to do anything to it. They just, again, offered me the opportunity to make any changes that I felt necessary before they ran it off. As far as where they stand on the traditional versus vanity spectrum, I am not 100% sure. I can tell you that there's this is a short digression. There's another Jeff Giles in the entertainment writing and editing world. He used to work for Entertainment Weekly and Time Magazine. About once a year, somebody used to try to dunk on me on Twitter for allegedly being the Jeff Giles who said that M. Night Shyamalan was going to be the next Spielberg. He's that guy, but he and I are pretty friendly, and we've had dinner together. We interviewed each other once, and so after he left Entertainment Weekly and he signed the deal to write his first novel, he mentioned to me that his publisher was disappointed that he was not me on Twitter because I had more followers. And I'm not saying that to stroke my own ego. I'm saying it to give you an example of the things that even traditional publishers at this point expect the author to do. They want you to come to the table with a marketing plan sometimes, or, like it just is not the kind of the stereotypical ideal of you sign the contract, the publisher takes over, your book is in stores all over the world, and you can comfortably, never have to work again. I think the amount of effort that most publishers are willing or able to put in at this point is relatively minimal. And that has been more or less my experience with these guys. Is if there's going to be a promotion, I'm probably going to have to be the one to beat the bushes to make it happen, which is how I ended up reaching out to you two lovely people. I wish I knew more about. I think this is something else that a lot of authors don't want to discuss publicly because you're sort of biting the hand that feeds you in a way. But I don't know for sure that my experiences correspond that tightly with other authors who have gone through a publisher. But I suspect that it's probably pretty much the same.
We've had some other interviews, I think back in season 1 or 2, I can't remember, but first couple of novelists that we had on the show had both published through Simon & Schuster. And so they went fully traditional. Their books had come out in sort of the early aughts, and the amount of self-promotion that was expected by the traditional publishers matches what you are saying. I don't think it's unique to the publisher that you chose. I think authors need to be prepared to come to the table with a following, with an audience, if they want to be taken seriously by anyone. And that's tough because how do you build an audience? So I know you have another podcast that you do, and you have a whole professional life, and you're obviously very active on social media. So you've got lots of ways to kind of grow an audience. But yeah, I mean, not only do you have to get good at writing something, you also have to get good at self-promotion. And I think very often those two skill sets don't reside within the same individual. You're good at one or the other, and very rarely it's both. So kudos to you.
Well, if they're deserved, I'll take them. I don't really know how to feel about it. Anytime, even now that I'm, really in the trenches trying to promote this, I link out to every single interview I do, and every single time I do it, I feel like the biggest asshole on the planet. Like I'm feeding into this very transactional social media world, right? Where everything you post is either about you or you're trying to get somebody to do something that's going to benefit you. And I don't like doing that. And so, yeah, I agree that most creatives they don't have that type of disposition. Yeah. It feels like dirty work, but I mean, how else do you do it?
I remember a long time ago, I think it was I think it was Billy Corgan, who was the lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins.
Yes.
Who said that, it's not enough to be, and I'm very paraphrasing because might be 20 years old, but he's like, I think he said something to the effect of what you're saying. It's no longer that you are simply a creative who has made this piece of art. You have to be your own manager. You have to be your own promoter. You have to do all of these things. And I'm pretty sure this was late 90s, turn of the century kind of stuff. So it was kind of as the dawning of the social media age came. And so it is very difficult. It feels like, I think I saw on social media once where I was, someone who was Gen X was very much like, I'm too old to be a super media star, but I'm too young it was something about how we're just not in the disposition of making our everyday lives and doing that transactional social media stuff. But on the other side of that, it's surprising when you do find those genuine connections with social media, and so it's difficult. It's tough. It's like, should I post that I wrote a paragraph today? Should I post about that?
Hashtag am writing. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Right. Exactly. And that's why we're really happy that you've joined us in the corner booth, because we think that this is one of the few places in the digital hellscape that's actually calm and nice and supportive and smart.
That being said, I'm following you right now on Blue Sky. So if you could do me a favor. No.
Yes. Follow. Yeah. It's a pivotal time in a lot of ways. And I don't know what will happen. I mean, Billy Corgan, as you said, made that quote at kind of the advent of the social media age, but also kind of the rise of digital distribution, which, while it has acted as a smasher of gatekeepers, also has made it harder and harder for anybody to make money doing any kind of creative work. People have become accustomed to this idea that art should be as close to free as humanly possible, if not.
Yes.
Let's do one shameless self-promotional thing coming out of that. How can people get your book? That's a good pivot, right?
It's the best pivot. They can get it wherever books are sold. I wouldn't expect to walk into your local bookstore and find it on the shelf, but they can certainly special order it for you. If you want to get it in a couple of days, you can order it through Amazon. There's also Amazon has an audiobook version, which was read by AI. I did not know that was a thing until this happened.
Whoa, can I hold on? So how did that, what, did you just get an email? They said, hey, by the way,
no, I didn't
HR 642 read your book.
No, I did not get an email. I went to the product page, which I do fairly regularly, to see if people are reviewing it. And one day I saw that was an option, and I thought, whoa, who read this? And I can't, they don't say AI, they don't say machine. There's some fancy corporate euphemism for AI. But I went to the page for the audiobook, and it was pretty clear to me that a human being did not read it. But I played a sample, and it seemed vaguely human-like. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Well, there goes another voiceover job for me.
I know. I would love to hear you read my book. If
I just went out to Amazon. I wanted to take a quick look as of the date of this recording, and your book has 13 reviews, and it is a 4.9 out of 5. So the folks who are finding your book are liking it very much. So I would encourage folks to go take a peek at it. I'm sure there's a way to get kind of a snippet of it on Amazon. They usually kind of reveal a few pages, so you can try it before you buy it. Is that kind of thing?
Yeah, but also you can just go to langleypowell.com. The entire first chapter is there. Are you guys familiar with, I think it's called Bigfoot Reviews? Do you know about that?
No, what's that?
No.
It's one of these services. I think there's more than one. You sign up, you give them the ARC, and I think the way it works is you review books by other writers and you get points that way, and then vice versa. So your book gets dumped into this marketplace, and you go it sits there until it finds a reader, and then they write a review, and that's supposed to be some way of drumming up a bunch of review activities. I signed up. I actually signed up for a paid tier instead of the free tier, and then I just sat there for a couple of weeks and watched as nobody picked up the book. So I think even the services and the gimmicks that are supposed to help you find reviews often don't. So I guess maybe there's a cautionary tale there for anybody who's thinking about this.
Yeah. And, we've heard from other authors that one of the bigger lifts that they have to do is find notable readers who can read their work and provide that kind of, jacket blurb, soundbite or whatever, that quote, so that it can be, I guess, to get the publisher excited about it.
Well, it feels like it's almost a little bit of that, with no disrespect to the folks who do this, but like, I think it's still in that realm of a transactional thing where if there's an author who, that might have a book or two, there's a sort of, let me read your book. So I sometimes am suspicious of that, because it's sort of like, hey, this book was read by Steve Sandusky. And him he's the author of My Table Has Four Legs. And it's like, oh yeah. So I personally don't pay attention to those things, because sometimes I'm like, I don't know any of these authors because I'm a horrible reader, apparently. But
if you did know the author, would that make you more likely to at least investigate the book? Because I know I have fallen prey to this.
Yeah. Possibly, yes. I mean, I guess it's the same way as if I were reading a lot of online lit mags. Here's an author that I really like, looking into their biography and finding where else they've been published sort of leads me to those other lit mags. So maybe in a parallel sort of way, it would, but
yeah, I think it's the size of the name, just how influential is it? Yeah. So back in the day, if you wrote a murder mystery novel like 30 years ago and Sue Grafton is like, this is the greatest up and coming new writer since me, then I think that would actually drive her readership to give that person a fair shake. But, it seems more and more likely that as these sort of big publishing houses fracture into smaller pieces, and as the self-publishers come in and try to, gain market share, and it's just a ton of noise. And so at some point it's like, well, if you don't have the blurb there from, Steve Sandusky or whatever you said, if you don't have that, then it's a negative, because, well, we expect that to be there, but it kind of doesn't matter who it is, because it's like, it just needs to be there at some point, unless it's Stephen King, whomever, these giant names that might drive traffic.
It's kind of, it feels like it's a little bit of value perception, These people, at least that's how it reads to me. And let's look at the big goose egg of number of novels that I've published. So this is coming from someone who hasn't done this, but it just sort of sometimes feels like it's like, for example, my photography website, I've got the same 3 quotes from clients that I had about roughly 68 years ago on there, because they were very nice quotes, and I could probably get some new ones. But for me, it was like, hey, look, I've got 3 nice quotes on this landing page. That should tell people that, I'm good at doing something. And so, boy, I'm really starting to sound like a real jerk about this. I'm just like,
I agree. I mean, the publisher did have me line up blurbs, and there's that grimy feeling again, right? It's heavily transactional. The authors that I reached out to were authors who had been on my podcast. So there is some implied quid pro quo there, right? I have allowed you onto my thing to promote your stuff. How about you scratch my back now?
Yeah. And also, I mean, it comes from my background. When I used to work at a record store, I had one of the guys I worked with had a punk band, and the entire marketing campaign for his punk band was, come see the band that everyone says, yeah, they're all right. So that's the kind of marketing that I sort of like, is that tongue in cheek kind of thing. So maybe that's why I'm a little bit like, or maybe I'm just sort of, I'm just sort of like, getting myself ready for when everybody says, no, I don't want to say anything nice about your book. I read it just so that I know that I'm not going to get that.
I had a friend who his when he played out, his poster would have some press quotes, and the one at the bottom was from his mother, who said, "It sounds like those dreadful Rolling Stones. Please turn it down." Always my favorite. And yeah, I agree. Art and commerce have to coexist, but there's always tension there, and it doesn't feel good in that spot.
Well, I think if the intent is pure, we can feel better about it. I mean, having put in the work to write a book that is as powerful and as authentic as we can, and feeling like, this is something that I want people to read, not because it makes me feel good, but because I think they would genuinely enjoy it. Okay, what's the best strategy to sort of get maximum exposure so that more people can enjoy this thing that I've labored over for a long time? I mean, that's okay. I mean, if you're going to put the work in, yeah, you'd like somebody to read it. Jeff, thank you for joining the show. It's really great having you here. We laughed a lot and we learned a lot, and that's the goal. So thank you. A very
special episode.
Right. This is the part of the show where we play the sappy music, and we all have learned something.
And
audience.
And next week we'll talk to Tim about his alcoholism.